In the heart of the Ecuadorian Amazon lies Shell, a small town with a story as vast and tangled as the jungle itself. It's the story of 5 missionaries who sought to connect with an indigenous tribe, but also the story of exploitation, religion, and history repeating itself. This isn't a tale of faith or tragedy. It's a glimpse into a long history of outsiders imposing their will on indigenous people, often with devastating consequences. So let's dive in. Part 1. The Mission. In the 1950s, a group of American missionaries, Jim Elliot, Nate Saint, and their team set out on what they saw as a divine mission: to reach the Orani people. This small, isolated tribe had a reputation for fiercely protecting their land from outsiders. But the missionaries had more than friendship in their mind. Their goal was to convert the Warani to Christianity, and in doing so, bring them into a world they believed was more civilized. Using Nate's small yellow plane, they dropped gifts like machetes, food, and tools, hoping to establish a friendship and goodwill. But let's not ignore the bigger picture here. The missionaries weren't just acting out of faith, they were part of a larger pattern. Westerners have long used religion as a way to gain access to indigenous lands, reshape culture, and exert control. Part 2. The Encounter. By January 56, the missionaries decided it was time for direct contact. They landed their plane on a sandbar along the river, setting up camp in the territory. At first it seemed promising, and they met a few people, exchanged gifts, and even shared food. But things weren't as peaceful as they appeared. Within the Awani group, mistrust grew. Rumors spread that the missionaries were dangerous, likely fueled by past violent encounters with outsiders, including oil companies looking to exploit the land. On January 8, 1956, a tragedy struck. A group of Rwani warriors, believing the missionaries to be a threat, speared all 5 men to death. Their bodies were found downstream, along with the wreckage of their hopes. Part 3. The Aftermath. The deaths of the missionaries made headlines worldwide. They were mourned as martyrs in the West, but for the Warani, this was an act of self-preservation. The missionaries represented a world that had often brought violence, disease, and exploitation of indigenous people. What happened next was both remarkable and controversial. Instead of seeking revenge, Elizabeth Elliot, Jim's widow, and Rachel Saint, Nate's sister, returned to live among the Warani. Over time, they converted many to Christianity, including some of the men who had killed their loved ones. But this wasn't just a story of forgiveness. The Rwani's way of life was forever changed. Conversion meant adopting new beliefs and customs, and many argue it eroded their cultural identity. Was this truly a triumph of faith, or another chapter in the long history of outsiders imposing their will on indigenous people? Part 4. The Bigger Picture. It's impossible to separate the story from the broader context. Shell Ecuador was named after the Royal Dutch Shell Oil Company, which had been exploring the region. The missionaries' arrival wasn't just about spreading faith. It was part of a larger push to tame the Amazon for Western interests. This pattern isn't new. Throughout history, indigenous people have been targeted by outsiders, whether it's for their land, their labor, or their souls. And while the missionaries may have had noble intentions, their actions fit into a much larger, more troubling narrative. Today, the Rwani continue to fight for their land and their way of life. So what do you think? Were the missionaries brave visionaries, or were they part of a larger history of exploitation disguised as faith? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for the more stories that explore the untold sides of history.